I quit nursing 6 months ago. After 4 years at St. Mary's Regional Medical Center, I just walked away. My friends think I had a breakdown. My mom keeps asking why I won't talk about what happened. The truth is, some things are better left buried. But lately, I've been having chest pains, and I can't shake the feeling that staying silent might be the worst mistake I ever make. My name is Sarah Chen, and I need to tell someone about room 237. I started working at St. Mary's right out of nursing school in Billings, Montana. It's not a big hospital, maybe 200 beds total, but it serves a huge area of rural Montana. The building itself dates back to the 1960s, all concrete and small windows, the kind of place that feels institutional, even when they try to make it homey, with motivational posters and fake plants. For 3 years, I worked day shifts in the ICU. The money was decent, but after my divorce, I needed more. Single mother, you know how it is. When they offered me a position on night shift with a 20% pay bump, I jumped at it. October 2023 was when I made the switch. The 7th floor ICU at night is a different world. During the day, there's constant activity. Doctors making rounds, families visiting, the cafeteria cart coming through. But after 11 p.m., it's just you, maybe one other nurse, and the patients who are too sick to go home. The fluorescent lights buzz differently at night. The elevator makes sounds you never notice during the day. And the heating system. God, the heating system sounds like someone walking around in the walls. My first week, I thought I was just adjusting. The fatigue, the way my skin felt cold, even though the thermostat read 72 degrees. The elevator kept stopping at the 8th floor, even though that floor had been abandoned for years. Structural problems, they said. Water damage. But whenever those doors opened, I could smell something antiseptic and wrong, like cleaning products, mixed with something organic that shouldn't be there. Room 237 was at the end of the hall, past the nurse's station. It was a single room, which was unusual for our ICU. Most of our rooms were doubles to maximize space, but 237 sat there alone, and I noticed something strange right away. It was always cold near that door. Not just cool, but the kind of cold that makes you want to pull your sweater tighter. The kind that settles into your bones. It was my 3rd week on night shift when I first met him. I was doing my 2 a.m. rounds, checking vitals and making sure everyone was comfortable, when I noticed the light was on in 237. That was weird because, according to my chart, the room was empty. We'd discharged the previous patient 2 days earlier, an elderly woman recovering from pneumonia. I knocked softly and pushed open the door. There was a man in the bed, elderly, maybe 75 years old. Thin gray hair, pale skin with that translucent quality you see in people who've been sick for a long time. He was awake, staring at the ceiling with these incredibly blue eyes. "Hello," I said, checking my tablet again. "I'm Sarah, your night nurse. I don't seem to have any information about your admission. When did you arrive?" He turned his head toward me slowly, and when he smiled, I felt something cold run down my spine. "Oh, I've been here before," he said, in a voice that was barely a whisper. "Many times." I pulled up his information on the tablet. Robert Henley, 75 years old, admitted for observation. No medical history in the system, no emergency contact, no insurance information. Just a name and an age. "Mr. Henley, are you feeling any pain? Any discomfort?" He kept staring at me with those blue eyes. "The others never ask about pain," he said. "They just tend to us until we don't need tending anymore." "What others?" But he had closed his eyes and seemed to drift off. His breathing was shallow but steady. I took his vitals. Temperature slightly below normal. Blood pressure low, but not dangerously so. Heart rate slow. Everything about him seemed diminished, like he was fading even as I watched. I went back to the nurse's station and tried to pull up more information about his admission. The electronic system showed he'd been admitted at 11:47 p.m., but there was no record of who admitted him or from where. No doctor's orders, no treatment plan, nothing. "Hey, Maria," I called to the other night nurse. "Do you know anything about the patient in 237? Maria looked up from her charts with this strange expression. "What patient?" "Robert Henley, elderly man, admitted tonight for observation." She shook her head slowly. "Sarah, 237 has been empty since Tuesday." I walked her over to the room. The light was still on. She looked through the window in the door, and I watched her face go white. That's not possible," she whispered. "I checked that room an hour ago. It was empty." We went inside together. Mr. Henley was exactly where I'd left him, breathing quietly, eyes closed. Maria approached the bed cautiously, like she was afraid he might suddenly sit up. "Sir?" she said softly. "Sir, can you hear me?" His eyes opened immediately, focusing on her with an intensity that made her step back. "You're new," he said to her. "Most of the night staff. They know not to disturb us unnecessarily." "Us?" I asked. He looked at me again with that unsettling smile. "The others, who never left," he said. "We're all here, you know, in the rooms that are supposed to be empty, waiting." Maria grabbed my arm. "Sarah, we need to call Dr. Morrison. This isn't right." We left Mr. Henley and went back to the desk. Maria called the attending physician while I tried to make sense of the admission records. The more I looked, the stranger it got. According to the system, Robert Henley had been admitted to room 237 6 times in the past 15 months. Different dates, different reasons. Pneumonia, cardiac episode, stroke, kidney failure. But always the same name, same age, same room. Each admission lasted exactly 4 days. Each time he was discharged with no follow-up needed. But here's the thing that made my blood run cold. The discharge notes were always the same. Patient expired peacefully at 0347. Body removed by Sunset Memorial Services per family request. He had died 6 times, and yet there he was, breathing quietly in room 237. Dr. Morrison arrived 20 minutes later, looking annoyed at being woken up. He was a tall man in his 60s, one of those doctors who'd been at St. Mary's forever and didn't like having his routines disrupted. "What's this about an unregistered patient?" he asked, not even bothering to hide his irritation. I explained what I'd found, the patient with no proper admission records, the history of identical admissions and deaths. Dr. Morrison listened with a growing frown. "Show me," he said. We walked to room 237. The light was still on, but when Dr. Morrison looked through the window, he shook his head. "The room is empty," he said firmly. "I don't know what game you think you're playing, but—" "Look again," I interrupted. "He's right there in the bed." Dr. Morrison opened the door and stepped inside. From where I stood, I could see Mr. Henley clearly. He was awake, watching Dr. Morrison with those pale blue eyes. "Doctor," Mr. Henley said in his whisper voice, "it's been a while." Dr. Morrison went rigid. He stood there for maybe 30 seconds, staring at the bed, his face growing paler by the moment. "I need to make some calls," he said finally, pushing past us and walking quickly toward the elevator. Maria and I were left alone with Mr. Henley. We stood in the doorway, neither of us wanting to go back into the room. "Sarah," Maria said quietly, "I've worked here for 8 years. I've never seen Dr. Morrison look scared before. Over the next 2 hours, I couldn't stay away from room 237. I kept finding excuses to walk past, and each time, Mr. Henley was exactly where I'd left him. Sometimes his eyes were open, sometimes closed, but his breathing never changed. It was like watching someone in a permanent state of almost death. At 4 a.m., I decided to do something that probably violated every policy in the hospital handbook. I went to the basement records room. St. Mary's still keeps physical files for patients going back decades. The basement is a maze of file cabinets and storage boxes, lit by bare bulbs that cast shadows everywhere. It smells like old paper and something else I couldn't identify. Something medical and antiseptic, but wrong. It took me an hour to find what I was looking for. A thick folder labeled Room 237, Special Cases. Inside were dozens of admission records for Robert Henley, going back not 15 months, but 15 years. Different handwriting, different forms as the hospital updated its paperwork over the years, but all was the same man. Same name, same age, same room. The earliest record I found was dated 2008. The most recent was from my first week on night shift. Every single admission followed the same pattern. 4 days in room 237, death at exactly 3:47 a.m. on the 4th day. Body removed by sunset memorial services. But here's what made me drop the folder and run for the door. There was another section in the file, a section labeled Staff Incidents. It contained incident reports from nurses, orderlies, and doctors going back to 2008. Reports about seeing patients in empty rooms, about electrical problems in the ICU, about staff members having nightmares and calling in sick. 3 nurses had quit without notice. 1 orderly had been found in the basement, catatonic, and had to be hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation. The most recent incident report was dated 2 months earlier. A day shift nurse named Jennifer Walsh reported seeing inappropriate patients in multiple rooms during what should have been routine checks. She complained of persistent chest pains and difficulty breathing during her shifts. Her final report was a resignation letter that simply said, "I can't work here anymore." I sat there in the basement, surrounded by decades of evidence that something was fundamentally wrong with room 237, and I realized that Dr. Morrison hadn't been surprised to see Mr. Henley. He'd been scared because he knew exactly who Mr. Henley was. When I got back to the 7th floor, it was almost 6 a.m. The morning shift would arrive soon, and I wanted to check on Mr. Henley one more time before I left. Room 237 was dark. I flipped on the lights, and the bed was empty. Perfectly made, like no one had ever been there. I checked the bathroom, looked under the bed, even checked the closet. Nothing. At the nurse's station, I pulled up his records. According to the system, Robert Henley had been discharged at 5:23 a.m. Discharged to where, it didn't say. But there was a note in his file. Patient transferred to Sunset Memorial Services, per standard protocol. I knew I should let it go. I knew I should clock out, go home to my daughter, and pretend this was just another weird night at the hospital. But something about that phrase, standard protocol, bothered me. The next evening, I came in early and went straight to the security office. I told the guard, an older man named Pete, who'd worked at St. Mary's for 20 years, that I was investigating some irregularities in patient transfers. Can you show me the footage from room 237 last night, between midnight and 6 a.m.? Pete looked uncomfortable. Sarah, you know I'm not supposed to show footage without authorization. Pete, this is important. I think we might have a problem with patient safety. He hesitated, then pulled up the footage on his monitors. We watched the hallway outside room 237 from midnight forward. At 2:47 a.m., we saw me approaching the room for my first check. We saw me go inside, come out, get Maria, go back inside. But here's the thing, on the security footage, room 237 was empty the entire time. The bed was clearly visible through the doorway, and there was no one in it. We watched me and Maria standing at the foot of an empty bed, apparently talking to nobody. Jesus, Sarah, Pete whispered. What the hell were you doing in there? I stared at the monitor, my mouth dry. Pete, you've been here a long time. Has anyone ever talked to you about room 237? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "There are some things about this place. Some things we don't talk about. For good reason." "What do you mean?" He pointed to another monitor showing the basement. "You see that hallway down there? The one that leads to the old morgue?" I looked at the grainy footage. There was a long corridor I'd never seen before, lined with doors. That's where they kept the bodies when this place was built. Back then, St. Mary's was built on the site of an old tuberculosis sanatorium. Hundreds of people died there between 1920 and 1950. When they built the new hospital, they just built right over the old morgue. He switched to another camera view. Sometimes, late at night, we see people walking down there. People in hospital gowns. People who aren't supposed to be there. My hand started shaking. "Pete, are you telling me this hospital is haunted?" "I'm telling you that some places hold on to things, and some things don't want to let go." I went home that morning with a sick feeling in my stomach. I couldn't eat breakfast, couldn't sleep. My daughter asked me why I looked so pale, and I didn't know what to tell her. That night, I almost called in sick, but I needed the money, and I couldn't explain to my supervisor why I was suddenly afraid of a hospital room. So I went in, determined to avoid room 237 completely. But at 2:47 a.m., the exact same time as the night before, the call light came on for room 237. I stood at the nurse's station, staring at the blinking light on the board. Maria was on break. The other ICU nurse was busy with a patient in crisis. It was just me and that blinking light. I walked to room 237 and stopped outside the door. I could hear something from inside. Not talking, but a sound like very quiet breathing. Labored breathing, like someone struggling for each breath. I opened the door. Robert Henley was back, but this time he looked worse. His skin had a grayish tint, and his breathing was shallow and irregular. When he saw me, he tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "Sarah," he whispered, "you came back." "Mr. Henley, how are you feeling?" "Tired," he said. "So very tired. But they won't let me rest." "Not completely." I took his vitals. His temperature was barely registering, his blood pressure dangerously low, his heart rate erratic. By every medical standard, he should have been unconscious or worse. "Who won't let you rest?" I asked. He gestured weakly toward the window. "The others. Down below. They're waiting for me to join them permanently. But something keeps pulling me back." I looked out the window, but it faced the parking lot. Nothing unusual there. "Mr. Henley, I need to ask you something. Do you remember dying?" His pale blue eyes focused on me with sudden clarity. 6 times, he said. "I remember all 6 times. The light fading, the cold creeping in, the feeling of letting go. But then I wake up here, in this bed, and I have to do it all over again." "Why? Why do you keep coming back?" "Because this place won't let me go," he said. "None of us can leave. We died here. And something about this place, something in the foundation keeps us anchored." I felt a chill run down my spine. "The tuberculosis sanatorium." He nodded weakly. "Hundreds of us died there, in pain, alone, forgotten. When they built this hospital on top of us, they didn't just cover our graves, they trapped our spirits. We're caught between worlds, Sarah. Neither fully dead nor alive. Then why do you keep dying and coming back? Because every few months, someone new like you sees us. Someone who can help us cross over permanently. But the hospital, the people who run this place, they don't want us to leave." "Why not?" Mr. Henley's breathing became more labored. "Because we're not the only ones trapped here. Some of the living, some of the staff, they've become part of it too. They feed on our suffering, our endless cycle of death and return. Dr. Morrison, the night administrators, even some of the other nurses. They know about us, and they profit from keeping us here. I backed toward the door. That's impossible. Is it? He asked. Haven't you felt it, Sarah? The cold that follows you home? The way your chest tightens when you're on this floor? The dreams of empty hallways and voices calling your name? I had felt those things. Every single one. You're starting to become part of it, he continued. The longer you work here, the more you see us, the more you become connected to this place. Eventually, you won't be able to leave either. That's not true. Then why are you here? He asked. Why didn't you call in sick? Why didn't you request a transfer? Deep down, you know you can't leave. None of us can. I ran out of the room and straight to the elevator. But instead of going down to the first floor, it went up. To the 8th floor, the doors opened onto a dark hallway that shouldn't exist. The smell hit me immediately. Antiseptic and decay. Like a hospital that had been abandoned for decades, but was still trying to operate. I could hear voices from the darkness, quiet conversations between people who shouldn't be there. I frantically pressed the button for the first floor, and mercifully, the doors closed and the elevator descended. But as we passed the 7th floor, I saw something through the small window. Figures in hospital gowns walking the hallways, checking empty rooms, going through the motions of a hospital that existed decades ago. I made it to the first floor and ran to my car, not bothering to clock out or tell anyone I was leaving. I drove home in a panic, my chest tight, my hands shaking. But here's the thing. I went back the next night. And the night after that. I couldn't stay away, even though every instinct told me to run. For 2 more weeks, I continued my shifts on the 7th floor ICU. Every few nights, Robert Henley would appear in room 237, a little more faded each time. Other patients started appearing too. A young woman in room 241, an elderly man in 239, a teenage boy in 243. All of them trapped in the same cycle, dying and returning, waiting for someone to help them find peace. But I began to understand what Mr. Henley meant about becoming part of it. I was losing weight, sleeping poorly, having nightmares about endless hospital corridors filled with patients who couldn't die properly. My daughter started asking why I was so pale, why I jumped at every sound. The final night was November 15th, 2023. I arrived from my shift to find room 237 occupied not by Robert Henley, but by Jennifer Walsh, the nurse who had quit 2 months earlier. She was in a hospital gown, lying in the bed, with that same translucent, barely alive appearance as the others. Jennifer? I approached the bed cautiously. What are you doing here? She opened her eyes and looked at me with the same hollow expression I'd seen on all the others. I tried to leave, she whispered. I quit, moved to Missoula, got a job at a clinic there. But I kept getting sicker. Chest pains, breathing problems, nightmares. Last week I checked myself into the emergency room there, and somehow I woke up here. That's impossible. Is it? Or is that what they want us to think? I pulled up her records on my tablet. According to the system, Jennifer Walsh had been admitted 3 days earlier for extended observation. But I knew she'd quit in September. Sarah, she said, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. You have to get out of here. Tonight. Don't clock out, don't say goodbye, just leave and never come back. Change your name if you have to, but don't let them trap you here like they trapped us. Who's them? The ones who know, she said. Dr. Morrison, Administrator Davis, Head Nurse Patterson. They've been here for decades, Sarah. They feed off this place, off our suffering. Every time one of us tries to leave, they find a way to bring us back. At 3:47 a.m., I watched Jennifer Walsh flatline. The monitors showed no heartbeat, no brain activity, no signs of life. I called a code blue, but when the emergency team arrived, they couldn't see her. To them, room 237 was empty. I stood there watching them search an empty room for a patient only I could see, and I realized I was completely alone in this nightmare. After they left, Jennifer's body was gone. But on my tablet, her discharge notes had been updated. Patient expired peacefully at 0347. Body removed by Sunset Memorial Services per family request. I walked to the elevator in a daze. When the doors opened, Dr. Morrison was inside, smiling at me with an expression that wasn't quite human. "Sarah," he said pleasantly. "Working late again, I see. You've become quite dedicated to the night shift." "Dr. Morrison, I need to ask you about room 237. His smile widened. "What about it?" "The patients who keep dying and coming back. Jennifer Walsh, Robert Henley, all of them." "I'm not sure what you mean," he said, but his eyes were cold. "Perhaps you've been working too hard. Night shifts can be difficult for people who aren't suited to them." The elevator stopped at the 8th floor, and the doors opened. Dr. Morrison gestured for me to exit. "I think you should see something," he said. Against every instinct, I followed him into the dark hallway. He led me to a room at the end of the corridor, and inside I saw them. Dozens of figures in hospital beds, all in various states of that same translucent, not quite alive appearance. Patients from decades past, all trapped in the same endless cycle. "This is our permanent ward," Dr. Morrison said proudly. "These patients provide us with something very valuable, a connection to the other side that allows us to enhance our medical procedures. We can keep people alive longer, push the boundaries of what's possible, because we have unlimited subjects to practice on." "You're torturing the dead." "We're advancing medical science," he corrected. "And now you're going to help us." He showed me a bed at the end of the room. It was made up with fresh linens, and there was a chart hanging from the footrail. I walked closer and felt my blood turn to ice. The chart had my name on it. Sarah Chen, 28 years old, admitted for observation. Expected stay, indefinite. "You've seen too much," Dr. Morrison said calmly. "But don't worry, you'll be able to continue nursing here. Forever." I ran. I ran through the dark hallway, down the stairs, through the lobby, and out to the parking lot. I got in my car and drove, not stopping until I reached my apartment. I called in sick the next day, and the day after that. When my supervisor called asking what was wrong, I told her I had a family emergency and needed to take extended leave. But the chest pain started 2 days later. The breathing problems came next. Then the nightmares. Endless dreams of walking through hospital corridors, checking on patients who couldn't properly die. Last week, I woke up in my own bed, wearing a hospital gown I didn't remember putting on. My daughter found me standing in our kitchen at 3:47 a.m., staring at nothing, talking to someone who wasn't there. Yesterday, I got a call from St. Mary's. They said there had been an administrative error, and I was needed for one more shift to clear up some paperwork. The voice on the phone was Dr. Morrison, and when I told him I'd quit, he just laughed. "Sarah," he said, "some jobs you can't quit. Some places become part of you. We'll see you tonight." I've been having chest pains all day. Sharp, stabbing pains that make it hard to breathe. And I can't shake the feeling that if I don't go back to St. Mary's tonight, if I don't report for my shift, I'm going to end up like Jennifer Walsh, dragged back whether I want to go or not. So I'm recording this, and I'm going to hide it where someone will find it. If something happens to me, if I disappear, or if people say I had some kind of breakdown, I want someone to know the truth. Room 237 at St. Mary's Regional Medical Center is cursed. The entire 7th floor ICU is built on top of suffering that was never properly laid to rest. The people who run that hospital know about the trapped spirits, and they use them for purposes I can't even fully understand. If you work in healthcare, if you ever get offered a position at St. Mary's, don't take it. If you're already working there, get out while you still can. And if you're ever admitted as a patient, whatever you do, don't let them put you in room 237. Some patients never leave. And once this place has its hooks in you, neither will you. If you're still listening to this story, you probably understand why I had to share it. Sometimes the only way to fight against something this dark is to shine light on it. If this story resonated with you, if it got under your skin the way it got under mine, I'd really appreciate it if you could show it some support. A like, a comment, even just sharing it with someone who appreciates real horror. It all helps keep stories like this alive. And in cases like Sarah's, that might be the only way to help. Three months ago, I was Dr. Michael Torres, Chief of Emergency Medicine at Riverside General Hospital in Camden, New Jersey. I had 8 years of experience, a spotless record, and a reputation for being able to handle anything that came through those doors. Today, I'm writing this from a motel room in Oregon, under a name that isn't mine, because some medical mysteries aren't meant to be solved. I need to tell you about the Friday Night Five. It started in January 2024, during one of the worst winters New Jersey had seen in years. Riverside General serves some of the roughest neighborhoods in Camden, so we were used to busy Friday nights. Overdoses, stabbings, domestic violence calls, the usual urban trauma. But that particular Friday, something different came through our doors. At 11:23 p.m., we got word that a 5-car pileup was coming in. Multi-vehicle accident on a 676, black ice, multiple casualties. I prepped trauma bays and called in additional staff. When the ambulances arrived, they brought us 5 patients, all from the same vehicle. A blue Honda Civic that had spun out and been hit by 2 other cars. The victims were a family. David Chen, 42, the father. Lisa Chen, 38, the mother. Their kids, Tommy, 16, Sarah, 14, and little Michael, 8. All of them were in critical condition with massive internal injuries, multiple fractures, severe head trauma. We worked on them for 4 hours. It was one of those nights where everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Equipment malfunctioned, IV lines kept blowing. Blood pressure dropped every time we thought we had them stabilized. One by one, despite everything we tried, we lost them. David went first at 2:17 a.m. Lisa followed at 2:31. The kids were the hardest part of my job that night. Tommy at 3:05, Sarah at 3:18, and little Michael at 3:47 a.m. I'd been in emergency medicine long enough to know that some nights you lose everyone, and there's nothing you can do about it. But this family, something about their deaths felt wrong. Not medically wrong. Their injuries were severe enough to be fatal. But wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The strangest part was how they looked after we pronounced them. Usually there's a certain peace that comes over people after death. But the Chen family looked expectant, like they were waiting for something. We sent their bodies to the morgue. I filled out the death certificates, and I went home to my empty apartment to drink myself to sleep. Just another Friday night at Riverside General, except it wasn't. The following Friday, at exactly 11:23 p.m., we got another call. 5-car pileup on bus I-676, multiple casualties, same intersection. When the ambulances arrived, they brought us 5 patients from a blue Honda Civic. David Chen, 42. Lisa Chen, 38. Tommy, 16. Sarah, 14. Michael, 8. The exact same family. The exact same injuries. Even the same clothes, down to the rip in Tommy's jacket and the Disney princess shirt little Sarah was wearing. But that was impossible, because I had pronounced all 5 of them dead exactly 1 week earlier. I stood in Trauma Bay 1, staring at David Chen's face, trying to process what I was seeing. Same graying beard, same scar above his left eyebrow, same wedding ring on his finger. His wallet, which I remembered checking for identification, contained the same driver's license, the same family photos, the same credit cards. Dr. Torres? The trauma nurse, Janet, was looking at me with concern. "Are you okay? We need to start working on him." I snapped back to the present and began emergency procedures, but my hands were shaking. Everything about this situation was identical to the week before. The same injuries in the same locations, the same vital signs, the same complications as we tried to treat them. And just like the week before, we lost them. One by one, in the exact same order, at the exact same times. David at 2:17, Lisa at 2:31, Tommy at 3:05, Sarah at 3:18, and little Michael at 3:47. When it was over, I pulled up their previous records on the computer system. According to our database, the Chen family had never been to Riverside General before that night. No record of their deaths the previous week. No death certificates in the system. Nothing. But I remembered. I remembered every detail of their injuries, every failed attempt to save them, every moment of their deaths. I had their previous death certificates in my own handwriting, locked in my office desk. I went to my office and checked. The certificates were gone. The desk drawer that I always kept locked was empty, except for a business card I'd never seen before. Sunset Memorial Services, it read. Eternal rest for eternal questions. The next week, I almost called in sick. I couldn't explain to anyone what I thought was happening without sounding insane. How do you tell your colleagues that you think the same family is dying over and over again? But I needed to know if it would happen a third time. Friday, 11:23 p.m. 5-car pileup on I-676. Blue Honda Civic. The Chen family. Identical injuries. Identical timeline. Identical deaths. This time, I was ready. I had my phone recording during the entire treatment. I documented every detail, took photos when I could do so without interfering with medical care. I was going to prove to myself that this wasn't stress-induced hallucinations or some kind of breakdown. But when I reviewed the footage later, it showed empty trauma bays. The recording captured my voice giving orders and describing procedures, but there were no patients visible in any of the video. It was just me and my team working frantically on empty stretchers. That's when I realized I wasn't just dealing with something supernatural. I was dealing with something that could manipulate reality itself. I started researching the Chen family between shifts. According to public records, David and Lisa Chen had died in a car accident in 1987, 37 years earlier. Their children, if they had lived, would have been in their 50s by now. But the obituary I found described them as dying at the exact ages I kept treating them. Tommy, 16, Sarah, 14, Michael, 8. The accident in 1987 had happened on Evo RT6, 7-6, at the same intersection where they kept appearing. But here's what made my blood run cold. The 1987 accident had occurred on a Friday night at 11:23 p.m., and the victims had been brought to Riverside General, where they were pronounced dead at 2:17, 2:31, 3:05, 3:18, and 3:47 a.m. Exactly the same times I kept watching them die. I dug deeper into the hospital's records from 1987. The emergency room doctor who had treated the Chen family was a man named Dr. Robert Morrison. According to his personnel file, Dr. Morrison had quit medicine entirely after that night, citing circumstances beyond medical understanding. But Dr. Morrison had left behind notes, buried deep in the hospital's archives. Notes that described exactly what I was experiencing. The same family, the same injuries, the same deaths, over and over again, every Friday night. According to his records, the pattern had started immediately after their first deaths in 1987. Every Friday night, the Chen family would arrive at Riverside General's emergency room and die again. Dr. Morrison had documented it happening 12 times before he resigned. His final note was terrifying. The family is trapped in their moment of death, forced to relive their trauma endlessly. But they are not the only ones being trapped. Each doctor who treats them becomes part of the cycle. I can feel it happening to me. My thoughts becoming focused only on Friday nights. My life revolving around the hospital. My ability to exist outside these walls diminishing. I'm leaving medicine before it's too late. I realized that I hadn't been home except to sleep in weeks. I hadn't called my friends, hadn't gone to restaurants or movies, or done anything that normal people do. My entire existence had become centered around Friday nights at Riverside General, waiting for 11:23 p.m. The fourth Friday, I tried to leave before the Chen family arrived. I clocked out at 11:15 p.m. and drove toward my apartment. But somehow, I found myself back in the hospital parking lot at 11:22 p.m. I don't remember turning around. I don't remember making the decision to come back. One moment I was driving home. The next, I was walking through the ER doors just as the ambulances arrived. This time, something was different about the Chen family. They were still dying in the same order, at the same times. But when little Michael Chen flatlined at 3:47 a.m., his eyes remained open, and he was looking directly at me. "Doctor," he whispered, even though the monitors showed no brain activity. "Help us." I looked around the trauma bay. Nobody else had heard him speak. The nurses were preparing to disconnect the equipment, going through the standard post-death procedures. But Michael's eyes were locked on mine. "We can't stop dying," he continued in that small, 8-year-old voice. "Every week we feel all the pain again. The car spinning, the impact, the metal crushing us. We remember everything, and we can't make it stop. What do you want me to do?" I whispered back, trying not to let anyone see me talking to a dead child. "Find out why we're trapped here," he said. "Find out what's keeping us in this moment, and help us move on." His eyes closed then, and he was just another body on a stretcher, another family destroyed by a car accident on a Friday night. But I knew I couldn't ignore what he'd said. These weren't just echoes or memories. The Chen family was conscious, aware, and suffering. They were experiencing their deaths over and over again, week after week, for 37 years. I spent the next week researching everything I could about the original accident. I talked to retired police officers, former hospital staff, anyone who might remember what had happened on I-676 in 1987. What I found changed everything. The Chen family hadn't died in a normal accident. According to a retired detective named Frank Morrison, no relation to the doctor, there had been something suspicious about the crash. The family's car had been found with its brakes cut. Someone had wanted them dead. But the case had never been solved because the primary evidence had disappeared from the police station the night after the accident, and the detective assigned to the case had died of a heart attack just 2 days later, despite being young and healthy. Frank Morrison told me something that made my skin crawl. "That accident was murder," he said. "But every time we got close to finding the killer, something would happen. Witnesses would disappear. Evidence would vanish. People working the case would have accidents. It was like the investigation was cursed." The more I dug, the more I realized that the Chen family's deaths were connected to something much larger and darker than I'd imagined. On the fifth Friday, I was ready with questions. When little Michael spoke to me again during his death, I asked him what he remembered about the night they died. "The man," he whispered. "The man in our back seat who wasn't supposed to be there. Daddy didn't see him until it was too late." "What man?" "What did he look like?" "He looked like one of the doctors here," Michael said. "Like he worked at the hospital. He said he needed a ride, but when Daddy picked him up, he did something to the car. Made it so we couldn't stop." The connection hit me like a physical blow. Someone at Riverside General had murdered the Chen family in 1987, and somehow their deaths were tied to the hospital itself. I started investigating current staff members who had been at Riverside in 1987. Most had retired or moved on, but there was one name that appeared in both the 1987 records and current payroll. Dr. Walter Davis, Chief of Hospital Administration. Dr. Davis had been a young resident in 1987, working in the same emergency department where the Chen family kept dying. According to his personnel file, he'd been present during their initial treatment and had been the one to officially declare their time of death. But here's what made my blood run cold. Dr. Davis lived on the same street where the Chen family had picked up their mysterious passenger in 1987. I confronted him the following Monday. I found him in his office, a man in his 60s with gray hair and cold eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Dr. Davis," I said, "I need to ask you about the Chen family." His expression didn't change. "I'm not familiar with that name." 5 people who died in a car accident in 1987. They keep coming back to our ER every Friday night. Now his eyes sharpened. "Doctor? Torres, you've been under a lot of stress lately. Perhaps you should consider taking some time off." "You were there the night they died," I pressed. "You declared their time of death, and you lived on Maple Street in 1987, the same street where they picked up their killer." Dr. Davis stood up slowly. "I think this conversation is over. You killed them, didn't you? You got in their car, sabotaged the brakes somehow, and then jumped out before the accident. But why? Why murder an entire family?" He walked to his office door and locked it. When he turned back to me, his expression was completely different. Cold, calculating, and utterly without remorse. "The Chen family was in the wrong place at the wrong time," he said calmly. "They witnessed something they shouldn't have seen. A transaction that was very profitable for certain people at this hospital." "What kind of transaction?" "Organ harvesting," he said matter-of-factly. "In the 1980s, there was a very lucrative black market for healthy organs. We had developed a system for acquiring organs from patients who wouldn't be missed. Homeless people, addicts, undocumented immigrants. It was quite profitable." I felt sick. "And the Chen family saw something?" "David Chen was a paramedic. He arrived early to drop off a patient and saw us preparing to harvest organs from someone who was still alive. We couldn't let him report what he'd seen." "So you murdered his entire family?" "It was necessary, Doctor," Davis said, as if he was discussing the weather. "But we didn't anticipate the complications." "What complications?" He smiled, and it was the most frightening expression I'd ever seen. "The dead don't always stay dead when they die with unfinished business. The Chen family's spirits became anchored to this hospital, specifically to the emergency room where they died. Every Friday night, they return to the moment of their deaths, trying to complete their journey to whatever comes next." "But they can't, because you murdered them?" "Exactly. Their deaths were unnatural, unjust. Until that injustice is resolved, they're trapped in an endless loop." "Then let's resolve it," I said. "Confess to the police. Let them rest in peace." Dr. Davis laughed. "Doctor Torres, you don't understand. The Chen family isn't just trapped here, they're profitable. Do you think it's a coincidence that Riverside General has one of the highest success rates for emergency procedures in the state. What do you mean? Every Friday night, we get to practice the most complex emergency medicine imaginable on patients who can't permanently die. We've learned techniques, developed procedures, perfected methods that have saved thousands of lives. The Chen family's eternal suffering has made us better doctors. The horror of what he was saying sank in. You've been using them for medical practice for 37 years. And now that you know about them, now that you can communicate with them, you've become part of the process. Haven't you noticed, Dr. Torres? You're the best emergency physician this hospital has ever had. Your success rate has improved dramatically since January. He was right. My performance evaluations had been exceptional over the past few months. I'd been saving patients I should have lost, making diagnoses I shouldn't have been able to make, performing procedures with a skill level I'd never possessed before. Every time you treat the Chen family, you absorb a little more of their death experience, Dr. Davis continued. You learn from their suffering, and in exchange, you become more and more tied to this place, more unable to leave. That's why Dr. Morrison quit. Dr. Morrison was weak. He couldn't handle the gift he'd been given. But you, Dr. Torres, you have potential. You could be part of something much larger. I'll never be part of this. You already are, he said. Tell me, when was the last time you went more than 24 hours without thinking about this hospital? When was the last time you felt truly comfortable anywhere else? I realized I couldn't remember. Every moment away from Riverside General felt wrong now, like I was missing something essential. The process is already well underway, Doctor, Davis said. In a few more weeks, you won't be able to leave at all. You'll become a permanent part of the staff, just like I did, just like dozens of others over the years. Others? Did you think you were the first doctor to discover the Chen family? We've had this conversation many times over the decades. Most doctors who learn the truth eventually embrace it. The few who don't. He gestured to a wall of framed photos showing hospital staff from different eras. They become patients themselves. Mysterious accidents, sudden illnesses, unfortunate coincidences. This hospital has ways of protecting its secrets. I backed toward the door, but it was locked. Let me out. Dr. Torres, you have a choice. You can fight this and end up like the Chen family, trapped in an endless cycle of death and resurrection, available for medical practice. Or you can accept your role here and help us continue our work. What work? We've expanded far beyond organ harvesting. We now have the ability to keep people in states between life and death indefinitely. We can study diseases that normally kill too quickly, test treatments that would be impossible on living patients, push the boundaries of medical science in ways that would be illegal anywhere else. He unlocked his desk and showed me files containing dozens of patient records. People who had been declared dead, but were still listed as available for extended study. Every major medical breakthrough that's come out of Riverside General in the past 4 decades has been developed using patients who can't permanently die, he said proudly. We've saved thousands of lives by sacrificing a few dozen. You're monsters. We're pioneers. And now you're going to help us continue this work, or you're going to become part of it involuntarily. I managed to unlock the door and run from his office, but I knew he was right about one thing. I couldn't leave. Even as I drove toward the state line, my hands turned the wheel back toward Camden. Something inside me, some compulsion I couldn't control, forced me to return to Riverside General. That Friday night, when the Chen family arrived, little Michael had a different message for me. We know about the others, he whispered as he died. The patients in the basement who can't die properly. Dr. Davis has been doing this for decades, trapping people between life and death for experiments. How many? Dozens, maybe hundreds. They're kept in a special wing beneath the hospital, conscious but unable to move, aware but unable to scream. Dr. Torres, you have to help them too. I don't know how. Break the cycle, he said. Find a way to let us die permanently, and the others will be freed as well. But be careful. Dr. Davis knows you're planning something. He's going to try to trap you before you can help us. The next week, I tried to access the hospital's basement levels, but I found that my ID card wouldn't open certain doors anymore. Dr. Davis was restricting my access, preparing to make me a permanent part of his collection. I realized I had to act fast. I researched everything I could about breaking supernatural cycles, about helping trapped spirits find peace. Most sources suggested that the spirits needed to complete their unfinished business, or have their deaths properly avenged. The Chen family's unfinished business was justice. They needed their killer to be held accountable. So I did something that probably saved my life and cost me my career. I called the FBI. I told them everything. The repeated deaths, Dr. Davis's confession, the illegal medical experiments, the trapped patients in the basement. I gave them copies of all the evidence I'd gathered, including recordings I'd made of Dr. Davis explaining the organ harvesting operation. The FBI raided Riverside General the following Tuesday. What they found in the basement made national news. Dozens of patients in what the media called zombie states, kept alive but not truly living, used for medical experiments that violated every principle of human decency. Dr. Davis was arrested, along with 6 other staff members who had been part of the conspiracy. The hospital was shut down pending a full investigation. And on Friday night, for the first time in 37 years, the Chen family didn't die at Riverside General. Because Riverside General no longer existed as a functioning hospital, the cycle was broken. The Chen family was finally free to move on to whatever comes after death. And the patients in the basement were either properly treated or allowed to die with dignity. But breaking the cycle came with a cost for me. Without the supernatural enhancement I'd been receiving from my connection to the Chen family, I lost the extraordinary medical abilities I'd developed. I couldn't perform at the level I'd become accustomed to, and other hospitals began questioning my competence. Worse, Dr. Davis had been right about one thing. I was tied to Riverside General in ways I hadn't understood. With the hospital closed, I began experiencing severe withdrawal-like symptoms, panic attacks, inability to concentrate, physical pain whenever I tried to practice medicine elsewhere. I realized that the only way to break free completely was to leave medicine entirely. So I resigned from every hospital position I held, turned in my medical license, and disappeared. That was 3 months ago. I've been moving constantly ever since, staying in cheap motels, paying cash for everything, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and Camden, New Jersey. But I still have nightmares about Friday nights. I still wake up at 3:47 a.m. in a cold sweat, feeling like I need to be somewhere I can't name. And sometimes, when I'm half asleep, I can still hear little Michael Chen's voice thanking me for helping his family find peace. The FBI investigation is ongoing. Dr. Davis and his co-conspirators are facing federal charges for murder, organ trafficking, and human experimentation. The full scope of what they did at Riverside General is still being uncovered. But I know the truth. There are other hospitals, other doctors, other supernatural cycles that haven't been broken yet. The medical profession, with its access to life and death, attracts people who want to push boundaries that should never be pushed. If you work in healthcare, pay attention to patterns that don't make sense. If you see the same patients returning over and over again, if you notice your colleagues behaving strangely around certain cases, if you find evidence of procedures that seem impossible or illegal, don't ignore it. And if you ever encounter something like the Friday Night Five, patients who shouldn't exist, who keep returning to relive their deaths, remember that they're not just medical anomalies. They're human beings, trapped in suffering, waiting for someone brave enough to help them find peace. The Chen family is free now, but there are others out there, still trapped, still dying over and over again, still waiting for someone to break their cycles. Don't let them wait forever. My name is Jerome Washington, and I'm recording this statement because I don't think I have much time left. For 2 years, I worked overnight security at Mercy General Hospital in rural West Virginia. What I discovered in those basement tunnels, what the staff was doing down there, it's something that needs to be exposed, even if it costs me everything. I've been a security guard for 15 years, ever since I left the Army. PTSD made it hard to do a lot of jobs, but sitting alone with my thoughts in quiet buildings that I could handle. Or at least, I thought I could. Mercy General hired me in September 2022. It's a big place, sprawling over several acres in the mountains outside Huntington. The main hospital was built in the 1950s, but they've added wings and buildings over the decades. What makes it unique is the tunnel system. Underground passages connecting all the buildings, originally designed as Cold War fallout shelters. My shift was midnight to 6 a.m., and most nights it was peaceful. I'd make my rounds every hour, check doors, monitor the cameras, make sure nobody was where they shouldn't be. The tunnels were part of my route, though I was told most of them weren't used anymore. The first sign something was wrong came during my second week. I was doing my 3 a.m. rounds when I heard voices coming from the lower basement level. Not unusual by itself. Sometimes maintenance worked weird hours. But these voices were chanting, speaking in unison, and there was something about the rhythm that made my skin crawl. I investigated, following the sound deeper into the tunnels than I'd gone before. The voices got louder as I approached a section that was supposed to be sealed off due to water damage, but the door was propped open, and flickering light was coming from inside. Through the gap, I saw them. Maybe a dozen people in surgical scrubs and white coats, standing in a circle around something I couldn't see clearly. They were chanting in a language I didn't recognize, but the tone was reverent, almost religious. One of the figures looked up, and I saw it was Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the chief of staff. Her eyes met mine for just a moment before I backed away and retreated to the security office. The next morning, I mentioned the voices to my supervisor, Carl. He got this strange look on his face and told me that some areas of the hospital had acoustic issues that carried sounds from other floors. He suggested I stick to the main tunnels during my rounds. But I couldn't forget what I'd seen. Dr. Morrison's expression when she saw me. It wasn't surprise or embarrassment. It was calculation. Like she was deciding what to do about a problem. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention to patterns in the hospital. Certain staff members would disappear for long periods during night shifts. Elevators would go to basement levels that weren't supposed to be accessible. And patients would occasionally vanish from their rooms, only to reappear the next morning with no memory of leaving. I started carrying my phone with me during rounds, recording video whenever I could. The problem was that the basement levels had poor cell reception, and my recordings kept getting corrupted or deleted mysteriously. It was in October that I first saw the symbols. I was checking the oldest section of tunnels, an area that dated back to the original hospital construction. The walls were concrete blocks, stained with decades of moisture and age. But carved into some of those blocks were symbols I'd never seen before. Geometric patterns, angular lines, shapes that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. They were fresh carvings, not decades old like the tunnels themselves. Someone had been down there recently with tools, marking specific locations along the route. I followed the symbols like a trail, deeper into the tunnel system than I'd ever gone before. They led to a heavy steel door marked Authorized Personnel Only that should have been locked, but wasn't. Inside was a room I'll never forget as long as I live. It was set up like some kind of operating theater, but wrong in every detail. The walls were painted with more of those shifting symbols. Surgical equipment was arranged around a central table, but not in any configuration I'd seen in medical shows. And there were stains on everything. The table, the walls, the floor. Dark stains that looked like they'd been there for years. Around the room were glass cases containing what looked like medical specimens, but they were moving. Organs floating in fluid, but pulsing with their own rhythm. Tissue samples that contracted and expanded like they were still alive. And eyes. Dozens of preserved eyes that tracked my movement as I walked around the room. On a side table were patient files, but not normal medical records. These files contained photos of patients in various stages of procedures. Photos of surgeries being performed on people who appeared to be awake and aware. Photos of organs being removed from bodies that were clearly still alive. I took pictures with my phone, as many as I could, before I heard footsteps in the tunnel outside. I hid behind one of the glass cases as 3 figures entered the room. Dr. Morrison, a surgeon I recognized as Dr. Peterson, and a woman I didn't know in a white lab coat. "The preparations for Friday night are almost complete," Dr. Morrison said. "We'll need to select 3 more subjects from the terminal ward." "What about the security guard?" Dr. Peterson asked. "He's been asking questions about the basement levels." "Jerome Washington," the unknown woman said, consulting a tablet. "Former military, divorced, no close family contacts. He'd be an ideal candidate for the long-term studies." My blood turned to ice. They were talking about me. "Not yet," Dr. Morrison said. "We need to be careful about staff disappearances, but keep monitoring him. If he becomes too much of a problem, we'll add him to the Friday selection." They started preparing equipment for whatever they had planned, and I took the opportunity to slip out of the room and back through the tunnels. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone, but I'd recorded audio of their entire conversation. Back in the security office, I tried to upload the files to the cloud, email them to myself, anything to preserve the evidence. But every attempt failed. The files would upload partway and then disappear, or the email would never send, or the cloud service would claim the files were corrupted. It was like the hospital itself was preventing me from getting evidence out of the building. The next night, I came to work with a plan. I'd hidden a small digital recorder in my uniform, something that didn't rely on the hospital's network. Whatever was happening on Friday night, I was going to document it completely. Thursday night was my last normal shift at Mercy General. I did my usual rounds, but everything felt different. Staff members who usually nodded hello looked right through me. The elevators kept taking me to floors I hadn't selected, and my key cards stopped working for several doors that had been accessible before. They knew I'd seen the room. They knew I was a threat. Friday night, I arrived for work to find a note on my desk. "Jerome, please report to Dr. Morrison's office immediately. Administration." Dr. Morrison's office was on the 4th floor, and as I took the elevator up, I noticed it stopped at every basement level on the way. The doors would open for a few seconds, revealing glimpses of tunnels that seemed longer and darker than I remembered. Dr. Morrison was waiting for me with 2 other people I recognized as department heads. They all wore expressions of false concern, like they were about to deliver bad news to a family member. "Jerome," Dr. Morrison said, "we need to discuss your performance lately. There have been some concerns about you accessing unauthorized areas of the hospital." "I was doing my job," I said, "making security rounds." "We understand that," said Dr. Peterson. "But some areas of the hospital are restricted for safety reasons. We're worried about your well-being." The third person, who introduced herself as Doctor Sarah Williams from Human Resources, opened a file folder. "We'd like to offer you a position change," she said. "A transfer to our long-term care facility. Better hours, better pay. and you'd be working directly with patients who need special attention. What kind of special attention? Dr. Morrison smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen. Patients who are participating in cutting-edge medical research, studies that are extended duration. I realized they were offering me the chance to become one of their victims voluntarily. I think I'll stick with security, I said. Jerome, Dr. Morrison said, her smile fading. I don't think you understand. This isn't really a request. The door behind me opened, and 2 orderlies came in. Large men, both of them looking like they could handle someone who didn't want to cooperate. We have a special program here at Mercy General, Dr. Morrison continued. A program that's been running for decades, helping us advance medical science in ways that wouldn't be possible at other hospitals. She walked to her bookshelf and pulled out a thick photo album. These are some of our long-term research subjects, she said, opening it to show me page after page of photographs. The photos showed people in hospital beds, but something was wrong with all of them. They were too still, too pale, and their eyes were aware but terrified, like they were trapped in their own bodies. These patients help us study diseases, test treatments, and develop procedures that have saved thousands of lives, Dr. Morrison said proudly. They're kept in a state between life and death, conscious enough to provide feedback, but unable to interfere with our work. You're torturing people. We're advancing medical science, she corrected. These subjects would have died anyway. Terminal cancer patients, end-stage organ failure, severe trauma cases. Instead of letting them die uselessly, we've given their suffering meaning. She turned to a photo that made me stumble backward. It showed a security guard from several years ago, a man named Frank Collins, who had worked at the hospital before me. He was in one of those hospital beds, eyes wide with terror, tubes and wires connected to every part of his body. Frank discovered our program just like you did, Dr. Morrison said. He was given the same choice we're offering you. Join us willingly, or join us involuntarily. He chose poorly. You can't do this, I said, backing toward the door, but the orderlies were blocking my exit. Jerome, we've been conducting these experiments for 40 years, Dr. Peterson said. We have subjects who have been conscious and aware for decades, helping us understand the limits of human endurance, the effects of various medical procedures, the boundaries between life and death. Dr. Williams added, the ritual you witnessed in the basement, that's how we maintain them. Ancient techniques combined with modern medicine, allowing us to keep people in states that should be impossible. What ritual? Dr. Morrison opened another file, this one containing photocopied pages from books I'd never seen before. The text was in languages I couldn't read, but the illustrations were clear enough. Diagrams showing surgical procedures being performed while participants chanted around the patient. We discovered these techniques in the 1960s, she explained. A combination of medical knowledge and older practices. Ways to trap souls in dying bodies. To keep consciousness anchored even when the brain should no longer function. You're using magic. We're using tools that science hasn't recognized yet, Dr. Peterson said. But the results are undeniable. We can keep people alive and aware indefinitely, allowing us to study conditions and treatments that would normally be impossible to research. They showed me more photos, more files, documenting decades of illegal human experimentation. Patients who had been kept conscious while their organs were harvested and regrown. Cancer patients who were allowed to die and be revived repeatedly, so doctors could study the dying process. Trauma victims who were kept in states of constant pain, so researchers could test pain management techniques. Your choice is simple, Jerome, Dr. Morrison said. Become part of the medical staff and help us continue this important work. or become part of the research. I looked at the orderlies, at the photos of trapped patients, at the satisfied expressions on the doctors' faces. I realized I had one advantage they didn't know about. The recorder hidden in my uniform had been running the entire time. "I need to think about it," I said. "I'm afraid that's not possible," Dr. Morrison replied. "We can't risk you leaving the hospital with what you know. Your decision needs to be made now." "Then I choose to become part of the research." She looked surprised. "Really? Most people fight harder than this." "I'm tired," I said. "Tired of running from things I can't understand. If this is how it ends, at least it's ending for a purpose." Dr. Morrison smiled and nodded to the orderlies. "Take him to Preparation Room 3. We'll begin the ritual tonight." As they escorted me through the hospital corridors, I managed to slip the recorder out of my uniform and drop it into a trash bin near the elevator. It was a long shot, but it was the only chance I had to get evidence out of the building. They took me to the basement room I'd discovered earlier, now fully prepared for whatever procedure they had planned. The symbols on the wall seemed to glow in the candlelight, and the preserved organs in their glass cases moved more actively, as if sensing what was about to happen. But as they strapped me to the central table, I heard something that gave me hope. Sirens in the distance, getting closer. The recorder I dropped had been found by a custodian who recognized what it was and called the police. The audio of my conversation with Dr. Morrison and the others was enough to get a search warrant. The FBI raided Mercy General at 3:47 a.m., just as Dr. Morrison was beginning the ritual that would have turned me into another one of their permanent research subjects. What they found in the basement made international news. 43 patients who had been kept in states between life and death, some for decades. Medical equipment that had been modified in ways that violated every principle of human decency, and documentation of experiments that read like something from the darkest periods of human history. Dr. Morrison and 12 other staff members were arrested. The hospital was shut down immediately, and the surviving patients were transferred to facilities where they could receive proper care or be allowed to die with dignity. But the story didn't end there. During the FBI investigation, they discovered that Mercy General wasn't alone. The techniques they were using, the rituals that allowed them to trap souls in dying bodies, were being practiced at other hospitals around the country. A network of medical professionals who had abandoned the Hippocratic Oath in favor of knowledge gained through supernatural means. The investigation is ongoing. They've found evidence of similar programs at hospitals in 6 other states, all connected to research that began in the 1960s with the discovery of those ancient texts. I've been in protective custody for 3 months now, helping investigators understand what I witnessed. But I know my time is limited. Other members of the network are still out there, and they view me as a threat to their entire operation. 2 weeks ago, I started having chest pains. The doctors say there's nothing wrong with me, but I recognize the symptoms from the files I saw at Mercy General. It's the same way their research subjects looked in the early stages, aware, but slowly losing control of their bodies. I think they've found a way to affect me, even from prison. Some kind of delayed ritual, a way to trap me, even though I'm hundreds of miles away from their basement laboratory. That's why I'm recording this statement now, while I still can. If something happens to me, if I disappear, or end up in a hospital unable to speak for myself, I want people to know the truth. The medical profession, with its promise to do no harm, has been infiltrated by people who view human suffering as a resource to be harvested. They've found ways to combine modern medicine with ancient practices, creating horrors that shouldn't be possible in the civilized world. If you're ever admitted to a hospital for a serious condition, pay attention to the staff. If they seem too interested in your case, if they ask questions about your family and support system, if they suggest experimental treatments, that aren't available elsewhere, be careful. And if you work in healthcare and notice patterns that don't make sense, patients who should have died but keep lingering, staff members who disappear for long periods during night shifts, basement areas that are off limits for unexplained reasons, investigate carefully, but don't investigate alone. The network that ran Mercy General is still out there. They're still looking for patients to add to their research programs, and they're still recruiting medical professionals who are willing to abandon their ethics for the sake of forbidden knowledge. Don't let them find you. My chest pains are getting worse. I can feel something changing in my body, something that shouldn't be possible. I think this might be the last recording I'm able to make. If you hear about Jerome Washington dying mysteriously in protective custody or being transferred to a hospital for urgent medical care, don't believe it. They've found me, and they're going to make me one of their permanent research subjects. But at least this time, the evidence will survive. I know this story probably sounds impossible, like something from a horror movie rather than real life. But if you've made it this far, if you're still listening, then you understand that some truths are too important to keep hidden, no matter how unbelievable they seem. Stories like Jerome's, they need to be told. They need to be heard. If this kind of darkness is getting under your skin the way it got under mine, I'd really appreciate your support. A like, a comment, or just sharing this with someone who needs to hear it. That's how we keep these stories alive. Final outro for hospital workers. 4 different experiences with the same horrifying truth, that some medical facilities have become hunting grounds for predators in white coats, places where the most vulnerable are preyed upon by those who swore to protect them. Sarah Chen discovered that some patients never truly leave. Dr. Michael Torres learned that death itself can become a prison. Jerome Washington found that hospital basements hide horrors worse than any disease, and Dr. Patricia Valdez paid the ultimate price for trying to expose the truth about organ trafficking. These stories might sound impossible, like something from the darkest corners of fiction. But evil doesn't always announce itself with dramatic flourishes. Sometimes it wears scrubs and a stethoscope. Sometimes it hides behind medical degrees and trusted institutions. If these stories have gotten under your skin, if they've made you think twice about blind trust in systems that seem beyond question, then they've served their purpose. Truth often wears the mask of horror, and sometimes the only way to fight darkness is to shine light on it, no matter how terrifying that light might be. Thanks for listening. Thanks for staying with these stories through the darkness. And if you made it this far, well, you probably understand why stories like these need to be told. Sweet dreams.